I want to again welcome you. My name is Kiami Harris. I serve as the Chief Equity and Strategy Officer here at ECFC, the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. And we have a great webinar for you today entitled Side by Side, Centering and Promoting Equity in Early Education. So we are going to hear about the playbook. We're going to experience the playbook. We'll have an opportunity to engage with each other to talk about your reactions to the playbook, and ask questions and all of that good stuff. And so I wanted to again thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending your time. And thank you for introducing yourself. So our time today, again, is going to be focused on how funders can think about philanthropic investments in a way that centers communities. You're going to hear about how we are defining equity. You're going to hear a little bit about ECFC's racial equity focus. You're going to hear about how this playbook was a way in which was community driven. You're going to see the inside, as I said to you, see the inside of the playbook. You'll get to experience it. We're going to have small group and large group reflection. And then as we walk away, we're going to think about what you're going to hear, a call to action, and hear about how you all can use this, how you can extend this, and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to share that with you. If you have any questions, of course, along the way, this is a conversation. You can certainly put it in the chat. We'll have opportunities for you to unmute yourselves. Feel free to turn your camera on or keep it off, whatever works for you. As you know, this session is being recorded and we will share it out with you so you can use it, review it again at your leisure. You will also get the link to the playbook so that you can experience it for yourself. So again, if you are just joining us, we invite you to share your name and where you're from. And also we'll brought you to this session so that we have an idea of how we can support you and make this a great experience for you. So I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists for today and those who will be sharing more with you about the side-by-side playbook. So I'll start with Rashonda Perryman, who is from Vanguard, but not just from Vanguard. She also serves as the chair of the ECFC Steering Committee and formerly led our racial equity work group. Also want to introduce you to Devanya Govan Hunt, who leads the Black Child Development Charlotte affiliate. And so we're very excited to have her here. And then finally, I'm going to introduce you to Nicole Sharp, who is from the School Readiness Consulting organization and worked on this playbook as well. And so I am going to now turn it over to Devanya.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this super important conversation. We are actually going to have just a short period of time to take as deep of a dive as we can into actually thinking about what lifting proximate voice of families and stakeholders is when we're talking about achieving equity. Oftentimes when we mention the term equity, we are talking about everything except for sharing power and centering the people who are most proximate to the issues or the problems that we're trying to solve for. So we are actually going to engage or indulge in a part of a video, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how lifting proximate voice in this process
is a word we hear often. But for all it's used, it can still be hard to know what it looks like. Specifically, what does equity look like at the start of life? In the context of early care and in education programs, for families, for communities, what does equity mean to the people most impacted by racism, marginalization, and other systems of oppression? So, they share their stories.
Equity to me is understanding that things are not equal and that things have always been behind for those that are living in the margins, that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latino, other language speaking, and recognizing that we need to provide resources to bring them to the same standard that we have everybody else.
Our children, and they're typically our Black and our brown children, it's our families, have limited opportunities for growth and for access to capital. If they grow up or are born in poverty, the chances of them coming out of that are very slim. Not because their parents or their families are incapable of doing things, but because the opportunities are not there.
Equity in the early childhood system is very important because early childhood really lays the foundation for a child's life. If you start off behind, it is so much harder to get to that even playing field or to get ahead.
And in order to have equity in the early childhood system, we're going to need to start over.
People at the margins are really those who are not included in the decision making, and they're the most disenfranchised. So it's not really about bringing them in to inform this. It's really about we going out there and being in the margins with people.
Learn from our storytellers, family providers, teachers, leaders, and community members of color as they help policymakers and leaders lean into the decisions that will identify and strengthen equity in early childhood systems.
So we often ask ourselves when we're doing this work, where is the best place to start, right? When we're talking about equity. One of the last statements on the video that you just watched talked about policymakers leaning into decisions, right? This is where it's so important to remember to center the voice of those with lived experiences and have conversations that really start off with questions and lots of listening. Most of the time when we've had experiences engaging with our community members, whether it's parents, it's teachers, it's community leaders, they often feel like they've been invited to conversations where decisions have already been made. They've already been made. So when we talk about equity, we really talk about sharing power and offering the opportunity for these folks, for those with proximate experiences, to offer input that will be taken back to the table and leveraged, right? Their experience is leveraged. Oftentimes they talk about these inauthentic opportunities to share or to participate in the decision-making process. And that's an important thing to remember. It's easy to walk into a space thinking that we are going to walk in here and we're going to come out with all of this language, right? All of this input about how we change policies, how we need people to be or to show up in our society, how we want these goals and these aspirations for the children that live in our communities. When we fail to stop and ask those who are living it every single day, what is it that you want? What are your hopes and your dreams for your children, for your families, for yourself in the profession of early care and education? What is it that society as a whole needs to do in order to make this journey easier, to make this journey equitable, to make this journey accessible with all the opportunities that could be presented for these groups of people? And it's oftentimes not because, like I mentioned, in the video, not because they can't take advantage of opportunities that are presented or that might be hidden underneath rocks and in between crevices in our communities, but it's because they're presented in an inauthentic opportunity or an inauthentic way. They are presented with preconceived notions about what our families, what they're capable of doing. We walk into these spaces thinking that we are going to do for people and not with people. So listening is so important, and taking our blinders off, right? Taking our blinders off and understanding that without our community, we can't go anywhere. We can develop as many policies as we possibly can up to wazoo, but it's not going to work. It's not going to change. It's not going to change the system. Our family voice, our parent voice, our provider voice, those are the tools, the most powerful tools that we can lean into to start massaging the system to do something different. So what we want to do right now is kind of take a few minutes to hear from you. we're very interested in hearing your reflections or kind of understanding where you are in this particular point in time. How do you define equity alongside communities? What are some things that you've experienced? What are your thoughts? Does something come to top of mind that you can automatically do different? Or maybe you walked into a conversation with a preconceived notion about a particular group of people in the early care and education setting. If you want to offer some feedback, and we encourage you to, we're going to ask you to just kind of raise your hand so that we can kind of go in order. We're not talking over each other because we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Or feel free to put it in the chat if you're more comfortable contributing to the conversation that way. And I can't see the chat, so I'm going to ask my colleagues here for help.
There's a raised hand.
Okay, I'm not sure who has their hand raised, but listen, unmute yourself and go for it.
It's Carter. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to say the name incorrectly.
It's okay. Hi, this is Carita Pimentel, and for equity, when I think about equity, I think about what Dr. Bavanya Goman Hunt was saying, is that the fact that when we are out in, working with others and working side by side and not looking down on what someone else is doing and being engaging and offering most critical high input to make things better, not just for one group of people, but for all groups of people.
Awesome. Thank you, Carita. There is a message in the chat. I can see that now that says preconceived notions go both ways. How best to bridge them? That's actually a really great question, because you're right. Preconceived notions do go both ways, right? We walk into spaces as quote unquote decision makers or leaders in our community with an idea of what's best, what we need to be listening for, instead of just kind of walking in and saying, hey, you are the expert. You are the one with the lived experience. Your experience matter. What you've gone through matters. Your life matters. And the best way that based on my experience and my organization's experience with leading these types of hard conversations, is walking into a space with your expert hat in the parking lot. You might even want to take it off and put it in the trunk, right? Because you walk in, take your shirt and your tie off, take your blazer off, make sure that you are able to connect with the people that are in this space you're going to listen to, and just go listen. Go listen. And throughout the conversation, you remind them that we are here in this space together. I don't know better than you because I've not walked your path. I've not walked on the sidewalk alongside you. I'm on the outside looking in. I am here to learn from you. As I mentioned before, oftentimes, people know when you are being authentic or when you're coming in with some idea about how to fix them. So the way that we pose questions when we walk into this space, trying to learn from other people is understanding and having them help, meeting them halfway and demonstrating that you are not coming in to fix them. That's why we love to start off with questions about, what's working well for you? What is your superpower? If you had to identify or define your superpower as an early educator, as a family member, what is that? What are your hopes and dreams for your family? And usually that kind of helps peel back layers, because you're not walking into a space assuming that someone needs to be fixed or that a community needs to be fixed, that there's something wrong, there's a problem. You lean into their strengths using a strength-based lens. And that actually breaks down so many barriers and so many walls to what's being shared in a space and how we receive the information, So you're absolutely right. and most of the time, and I know I'm gonna try not to ramble here, y'all, because I get real passionate about our folks, right? Is that we'll find out that these issues of like power, culture, and racialized assumptions actually stack right on top of the thoughts that we have when we walk into these spaces. Come out from behind your desk, leave your office building, and put boots on the ground. Put boots on the ground. Go out into the community, right? Because you want to be a part of, you want to build with, you want to understand with, you want to learn with community partners. And so, you know, like that's a start. I know it seems like pie in the sky and this really fluffy answer, but that really is a start. People want authenticity. They want to know that you care about them, you care about their children, you understand how valuable you know, the space early care and education is. You understand the genius that parents bring to the table when we're talking about what's best for their children, because they do know what's best for their children. They might not articulate it in the way that we articulate it in our behind our desk or in our boardroom when we close the door, right? But they know what's best for their children. They are their children's first and most important educator and lifelong advocate, right? Our early educators know what they need in order to thrive in spaces. They know the difference between what happens in the programs they operate in and serve in versus what happens in programs across town, right? So they know this. We got to be able to walk into a space, take it all off, folks, because nobody didn't ask us for our little funky opinions anyway when we walk in there, right? Take it all off, leave it at the door in the parking lot, pack it in the trunk if it's super strong, because y'all know we can be super strong sometimes. We know everything. Put it in the trunk and then walk in with a mindset and the demeanor that you are here to learn and that you appreciate them allowing you into their space. We're not doing them a favor by going in and asking for their opinion. They're doing us a favor by inviting us in or taking us in, accepting us in their space and sharing their experiences. Pie in the sky sounds like it, but it really does work. Thank you for that question. Anybody else? Okay, Miss Patricia has something in the chat here. I'm gonna add voice to it, Miss Patricia. Hello, I'm Patricia. She's from the Florence Mueller Foundation, striving to, oh, she's sharing why she showed up here. Listen, I started, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish it, okay? Always striving to improve our direct work and the work being done at community tables. My box here stuff, at which we have a seat. Equity, sharing, power, listening to those closest to the problems are often spoken of, and I want to get better at truly living these values. Amen. Amen. We do. It's easy for us to talk about this thing, and we are working with people. So this is hard work, right? It's easy to say we're going to do it. And our society is so full of opinions, so full of attitudes, so full of things that were built on this premise society that we exist in, right? So it's easy if we are not careful to let that stuff seep down into our spirits. So when we show up in these spaces, listen, it's loud. It comes through the door before we do. And it's hard work. So this is something that we have to constantly tell ourselves that we have to work at. Constantly tell ourselves that when we walk in this space, we're here to listen, learn, listen, and appreciate the fact that someone is willing to share their experiences because they're all different. I'm not watching the time here, but I'm pretty sure one of my colleagues will flag me. Probably need to move on. Let me just check the chat one more time. I wish I could see your beautiful faces. I see some of them. Okay, all right, so we are going to turn the mic over to Ms. Perriman, and she's going to walk us through the next few minutes or so of this important conversation. Thank you for sharing in the chat and for unmuting yourselves and sharing.
Thank you, Devanya, as always, I love when you let your passion unleash unleash, and I appreciate, thank you for that. And I also am cognizant of the fact that maybe this is like your fourth time really being in a position of teaching those of us in ECFC. You've done it like in person, you've been on a number of our webinars. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you taking the moment to tell us and help us understand how to be sure as funders that we are making sure to listen to those who are most proximate to the work that's happening that we are trying to support. So I can't thank you enough over and over again for your terrific leadership. For those of you that I have not gotten a chance to meet, I'm so excited. I've been looking at pictures and faces, and I'm just so excited about all the folks who are on. I'm Rashonda Perryman. As Kiami said, I chair, it is my pleasure to chair the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. And my day job is that's what I do on the side. My day job is to lead the strategic making portfolio at Vanguard, the Strong Start for Kids portfolio. We are an investment, Vanguard is an investment management corporation, so I do corporate funding. And I have been tasked by Kiami to really talk a little bit about, before we sort of dive into the playbook itself, to really talk a little bit about how we got here from an Early Childhood Funders Collaborative perspective, and really talk about my journey just a little bit. So I just want to spend a few minutes on that, and then I'll talk through where we are at ECFC, and then hand things over to Nicole so she can walk us through and show you a little bit about the playbook. So I've been a member of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative for my entire time in philanthropy, and I've been doing this work. It's hard to believe, but almost 10 years. And I've spent my entire career in early childhood, and I've worked in different roles in the sector. As a teacher, I worked in child care subsidy as a case manager, I worked in public policy, but philanthropy, it was just, I had no context for what this role was. Certainly I knew the content from my years of being in the work, but the context was just so different. And ECFC really helped to guide my thinking around this work, the mentorship, the camaraderie, the thoughtful approaches to philanthropy. They've really been my bedrock and my learning around the sector. And along with that learning in philanthropy, I think that those of us who've been in early childhood for a long time, like I know, that early childhood is not collectively across the sector have we talked about equity and inequity in the way that we've talked about it probably over the last 7 or 8 years. So my time in philanthropy, my time in ECFC really mirrors this sort of moment in time that I'm really proud of around the early childhood sector, where we're beginning to lift these issues and really deal with them. So it's enabled me to really start and develop my own journey around equity. And that was significant for me, really confronting what it is I've learned as a worker within the early childhood. What have I learned and what is it that I need to unlearn? That's been a part of my journey. I've had to confront my own bias. And quite frankly, I've had to do and continue to do my own work. As a Black woman, doing this work in general, I took for granted that I understood all the ins and outs of inequity. But philanthropy has really forced me to ask myself how I understand my power, my privilege in this position that I work in and other positions in community with my children, all that kind of stuff. It has forced me to look at this very differently. When I need to step up, step back, step around. And the playbook is a really good example of sort of stepping back and letting those who are proximate tell the story, define what equity is and what it means. And I feel really lucky to sort of have been a part of ECFC during these years when sort of this equity notion is being lifted. And we're beginning to really unpack some of those hard questions. And I just, it's been important to me to keep saying, I'm always careful to say this, that I think as a sector, we've begun to unpack these questions. But if we're honest, we have to recognize that some of these questions that we've begun pondering in early childhood have been asked for decades by organizations and leaders. People like Evelyn K. Moore and NBCDI and Barbara Bowman and researchers who've been in this work for a long time have always talked about this inequity. But only recently are we seeing this as sort of a categorical, a philosophical way in which our sector has to shift and think. Nonetheless, for me, over the last decade, my growth around racial equity has really been propelled by the work we've done here at ECFC. I'm just really proud of it. So as Kiami said, before becoming the chair, I really had the pleasure of chairing the first Racial Equity Committee of ECFC. And what was clear early on, and frankly, very important to me, was that as a group of funders, we did some collective learning and created a set of shared understanding. I don't know about you all, but I'm always amazed, and I'm continuously amazed at how often I sit in equity conversations and find myself at tables with folks who really have different definitions of starting points. And we don't realize that we have different definitions, or we don't realize that we're starting from different places until we've had the conversation. So from what, sorry about that, I'm in an area and we, my lights go off if I don't move a lot. I'm in an office. So if you see me doing like that, that just means I'm trying to get my lights back on. But we as funders, we were sort of thinking about how do we create sort of a shared set of understanding. Oh yeah, I was saying that it's interesting how often I sit in conversations and realize that we're starting from different places. So it was important for us at ECFC to really think together and figure out how do we create a shared definition, a shared set of learning where we're starting from the same place, where we are beginning to understand the bias in the system in the same way. So we did a number of different things early on to try to get toward that. I think back in it was before the pandemic, 2019, we did sort of a 2-day deep dive into what it looks like, the history of bias and inequity, like where it was built on, how we got here, you know, and the fact, and we had to sort of reckon with a couple of things, right? That, you know, that these inequities that we see, the impact of those things are built out of larger systemic issues. And lots of those had to do with the history of childcare, the history of who takes care of children and babies, and how that was really tied up in the history of systemic inequality in the country as a whole. Really reckoning with the fact that our research in ECE, early childhood, is really built around an understanding of parenting practices and norms that are white-centered and don't take into account the raising and rearing practices, some of those really, you know, time-held raising and rearing practices of people of color. And because of that, the research is biased toward that norm, and our collective definitions of so many things, including quality, is biased in that as well. So at ECFC, we've been on that journey to begin to understand what that looks like and what that means. And we can all sort of talk about how we've learned in different ways around there. We initially started, like I said, like in 2019, sort of thinking together in this 2-day deep dive where we sort of peeled back these layers and really talked about the convergence of racial equity and inequity within the early childhood field and philanthropy, and begin to unlock what that sort of uniting factor was and what was our role in it as funders, and how do we get out of the role, and sort of all that Devanya said, right? We did listening exercises, right? Like stop for a second, listen to who's talking to you. And those, believe it or not, it was hard. It was hard to just sit in space with someone for 2 minutes and not say anything. So a lot of good work. And I'll just tell you that we recognized early on that there were sort of 3 legs to our work. One was, can we increase the opportunities for individual learning for members? So we've done that over time. 2 was, as individuals, can we make sort of practice changes? You know, we act as gatekeepers. Can we learn? Can we shift the way we're giving our operating practices? How do we do that? So while we're learning, can we actually shift our practices? And then 3rd and finally, what are our collective actions? Are we talking together? How do we work together to have sort of those seismic systemic shifts that are important to move the sector along? And since then, we've continued to learn together and work together. And there are plenty of examples of how our goals around this work have really bared fruit, from the raising child care fund to, quite frankly, Kiami's position, really sort of operationalizing what does racial equity mean within Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. So I'm telling you all this to sort of give you this background that we have been on a journey, and I think that this playbook is really just sort of not a period, it's a comma to sort of what those, like, how do we take what we're learning into practice? You know, this came out of me learning very specifically how to really work in this sector, how to step back and listen, how to think with groups, but not be the front voice. And that wasn't easy, particularly when you're sitting in a funder space. It wasn't easy. So I say that to other funders who are on the phone, on the call, who's also going through that journey. Going back and looking at how you funded before you started these practices and how you fund now. I think the racial equity racial equity toolkit is really just a good example of that. We've essentially created a framework for how we want to do this work, how we might practice, how we might fund in the space. And so that's really the background of the work as funders together. The background of this particular document was, working with school readiness consultants and saying, like, in early childhood, we use sort of data and information to inform everything we do, right? And there's somewhere we can go to get that. If I want to know about brain development, I'm going to go over to Sean Cuff's website, and I'm going to, find me some information that I need to pull and put in front of my board. Where do we find that? While we knew there was a lot of work happening around racial equity, how do we begin to build sort of the place where this information is kept? And we had really good conversations, and at some point realized, all right, that's great. We can do all that and do it in a great way, but let's step back and let's let those who are most proximate, those who are closest to really do the defining. And I think that this is a terrific, terrific example of how that played out. So I'm going to stop here because I have also gone over my time, and I'm going to hand things over to Nicole so that she can walk through the equity playbook.
Thanks, Rashonda. So just here, just really grateful to have had the opportunity to support this work. Happy to share a little bit more about the side-by-side playbook as a really specific example of how philanthropic investments might be used in efforts designed in ways that really center children, families, and communities to drive towards more equitable solutions and systems change. And so for this work, there was really two key considerations that really helped to guide the effort. One was equity in early childhood is a word we now hear more often, right? So like Rashonda was saying, is something particularly the last couple of years that it's almost, a buzzword to some extent, but really what does that look like at the start of life? And really thinking about how to best define what equity means, and what equity means also to the people most impacted by racism, marginalization, and other systems of oppression. And so those two questions were really key to guiding what this project would kind of seek to answer. And so next slide, please. So just a little bit about the process. So we began the project by really from the drawing board. So just starting out with trying to envision all of the ways that would be essential to work alongside communities. And so particularly driven and wanting this to be driven by the insights that have been historically unrecognized and the most impacted by existing inequities. So Black, Indigenous, Latina, and other people of color. And so to do so, it really ended up being a really multi-layered approach. And so for the first layer, there was a range of stakeholders that were engaged from the very beginning, just planning, advising on the project to really create a vision for what a community-driven framework for system change even looks like. So what would the framework mean? What would it look like to authentically and meaningfully really engage communities in the work? And so after defining that process, this advisory group was also super key to defining and just guiding the work throughout the entire process. So there was multiple touch points that we came back saying are we on the right path? Are we understanding things correctly? So again, thinking about how the process itself is really embedded in the understanding and the values of community members. The next layer, and really core to the effort, and as Devanya shared, it's just really important to listen and learn directly from the stories shared by families and communities to capture their lived experience and solutions for change. So we're able to connect with storytellers representing multiple identities, roles, locations across the nation, who are all extremely generous with their time to be able to share their perspectives of what equity looks like. What would it take to have a system that truly values and supports every child and family? And then from that, the playbook was then shaped and developed. So it really emerged from this synthesis of community proposed solutions shared by families and communities. And it also includes opportunities for action, so things that are really specific of what can be a call to action, opportunities for like self-reflection and different tools and resources for continued learning for those seeking to advance equity within early childhood systems. So the audience was specifically around state leaders, researchers, policymakers, and funders like yourself as some of the primary audience members, where families and communities were speaking like directly to folks of being able to lift up and share what their needs and their vision for like what an early childhood system would look like. Next slide. And so we just want to be able to take a peek and explore together. So feel free to go to sidebysideplaybook.com, and that's where the resource lives. And we could also take a really quick tour of the resource together. And so in the middle, you'll see read the playbook. So be able to have access to the full document online and be able to flip through, read, share, as well as download it in English and Spanish. So there's 2 different versions that are available. On the Storytellers tab, there are links to videos to learn more about all of the storytellers and their personal experiences. And there's like specific videos to share their experiences within the early childhood system and all of their hopes for young children. On the Join Us in the Transformation, it's really the call to action. So this is an overview of the community solutions, as well as the resources and the toolkit tabs were opportunities to learn more and to share. So all of this is located in this one space. And as Rashonda was saying, was, hopefully just a comma to the work. And so this is a place for us to begin to start, an opportunity for us to listen and learn and to lift up what is important to families, to communities, for this to be really central to driving the change that we envision seeing. So when we talk about equity, what that really means, it's really being defined by those most proximate, and having this as a tool or a beginning place to really think together of what that looks like. And so I'm going to pass it back to Devanya for some reflections, so we can do some thinking together about examples, other opportunities, what else might be needed to further center family and community voice and working towards more equitable systems for change.
Absolutely. Thank you for walking us through that, through this super powerful tool here. So we're going to spend some time with a short video clip. And then we're actually going to break up into small groups for some reflection and discussion. Now, let me just let you all know this. This is not a part of the script. So usually this is a part of the presentation or the webinar. When they say small groups, people start, clicking that little red button on the bottom of the screen to exit. We don't want you to do that. We want you to stay and engage in this conversation, because it's your voice and your experience, and what you get, what you feel, what you take away from this video clip is super important to this work, right? We're talking about listening and sharing and experiencing. So we're going to watch a short video, and then we'll actually break up into small groups for some reflection and discussion. And then we're going to come back together as a whole group to debrief our experiences in a small group, okay? So when you when you go into your small groups, when you're invited into that breakout room, what we want you to think about is, what would it take to center family and community experiences in early childhood investments? Like, that's what we want you to click into the breakout rooms. That's what we want you to go into those breakout rooms with. So we're gonna watch a video right now, and then you'll receive your invitation.
So equity doesn't mean pouring dollars from wherever they come from, whether it's federal dollars, whether it's state dollars. If we're talking about MEC pre-K, it doesn't mean pouring money into this one one construct, right, that's governed and managed by the state. It means really listening to what people want. It is critical in early childhood education, and particularly in North Carolina, because we're talking about our Black and brown children right now, because they're not getting what they need. They're not getting what they need. And they're not getting what they need because of the way that we manage childcare in this state, because of the way that we approach childcare in this state, and because of the way that we define what quality childcare is, or what quality care, early care and education is. And the way that we currently define it, it lies within this whole concept of whiteness, of white is right, this whole idea that, you know, our system was built on top of and intertwined with this whole idea of white supremacy. So that means that our children are not necessarily getting what's culturally responsive and what's culturally relevant for them in terms of early care and education. So when we take away the power, take away opportunities for our families to make decisions in that manner for their children, they can have peace of mind. We operate in an advocacy bucket by itself, which means that we try to make sure that we're seeing our strength-based lens, and we're providing them with tools and equipment and material and language that they need in order to advocate for themselves and for their children. So we believe that our families, our parents, our children's first and most important educator and lifelong advocate. So everything that we do, whether it is providing books for classroom libraries directly to our teachers, providing books directly into the hands of our children to build home libraries, whether it is sitting around the table with a group of family child care professionals or center directors and just having conversations about what they need to grow their programs or to make sure that their families are thriving, then we believe that we're giving them tools so that they can advocate for themselves. Our job, our mission, our goal is to make sure that we're working ourselves completely out of the picture, because we believe in a grassroots approach. And that means that all the power lies within those people who are not typically invited to the table, which is our families, our parents, our family child care practitioners, sometimes our center teachers, who are not invited to the table or in the room when it comes to making decisions about what families need to thrive in this state. So we want to be able to give them enough tools to be able to back away so that they can actually make choices that they feel are the right choices for their families, their businesses, themselves, their communities.
Okay, so we are going to open the breakout rooms now, I believe. We're going to open the breakout rooms. So when you receive your invitation, just kind of go into that room and you'll have a facilitator in there to kind of help us through the conversations. So, but feel free to reflect on what you heard in the video, reflect on what you've heard thus far. And we'll see you in a few minutes.
I know everybody's like, this is the best part. Don't let us go yet. It really was. Is everybody back? All right, I think it's you, Devonia, and Rashonda is going to lead us into our next conversation in the short time that we have left, and then wrap us up.
Well, I mean, Devonia, if you want to say a couple of closing words, feel free, and then I can just give us some specific ways in which we might use the playbook going forward.
Absolutely. So, man, you're right. That was definitely an awesome opportunity to spend time in a small group. Wish we can come back together again in that manner. I just want to leave with close with a couple of things. I know we did not get an opportunity to answer all the questions. Some really great questions in a small group, but I want to offer an example of something in terms of dollars and resources. And when we say that you can't fix every problem by throwing dollars and resources at them. The example that I'm going to share really quickly is about a particular program that we're familiar with, who has been working in the community for years, working successfully in a community for years. We had a funder to actually approach this particular organization you know, for needs and what's happening, and pretending to have this equity conversation, pretending to have this thing, but already walking into the room with a solution in mind, because this is where they wanted their dollars to go. And they go in and they throw a check at this individual that was restricted dollars, and restricted to something, a part of a project or a part of the program that the executive director and his team did not express a need for. We had a funder walking in, throwing dollars at a situation, trying to tell them how to do their work. So when I say we can't just throw dollars, can't throw resources at things and fix it, you have to walk in and understand what the need is, what the want is, what the desire is, where the holes are, because they didn't need that funder to tell them how to do their work. They needed dollars in order to build on their capacity so that they could expand the work that they were doing. It's the difference between walking into a space and saying we're going to support and just pour resources. Resources are very much needed. Dollars are needed, but we have to be cognizant about how we're offering those dollars, what we're actually requiring programs and to do with those dollars in communities. When we're not listening, sometimes we miss the point. So if you're throwing dollars at the wrong thing, we're not solving issues. We don't need more pencils. We don't need more pencils. We don't need more books in this particular space. We need another staff person. We need to be able to build more infrastructure, right? Or a stronger foundation so that we can collect data in the way that our families are rendering data. So see people first, keep an open mind, be cognizant of how you walk into programs. And there's so much more, y'all. We got to get together again.
There's so much more. So much more. Thank you so much, Devanya, and thank you all for participating. There are 3 ways that I consistently say I think this can be used. One, there are, I think, 19 storytellers. I think there's 19, maybe a little fewer than that, but there are videos. When I think about how this is useful, board meetings, community meetings, trainings, beginning of presentations, panels, use it. It is open sourced. Go to the website, it's there for you to use in any way that makes sense as you're beginning to pull out sort of what equity looks and feels like. The second thing I think is really helpful here is there are examples. So not only do we have voices of community practice, we also have actual examples of work that is happening, equity work that's happening on the ground in communities. Maybe those things can be replicated. Maybe those things can be built out. If you are a funder looking to sort of put money into something that's already on the ground and you want to Devanya's point, support the work that is needed, there are examples of what that work looks like and contacts and, you know, all of the sort of work that we know is happening in the space, that try to really think about where that is and collect it all. And lastly, there's an opportunity to build on this. As much as we try to make sure that we were thinking across all ethnicities and all culture, we did not. We just didn't have the funding, the time, any of that. So if there are folks on this call who want to build, who want to partner, who want to think about where this is held and whether we can hold other things there. Are there parts of this missing? Yes. Are there voices that aren't here? Yes. Let's talk about how we can get all of the voices that are proximate to what's happening on the ground visible within this and visible within this platform. So thank you all. We are right on time. I don't know if there's anything else to say, Kiami. If not, everyone, please be well.
Thank you.